We fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban. And so if you want to say that the problem isn't overthrowing the regime, the problem is sticking around and nation building, okay, but we didn't do that in Libya. We just completely destroyed the place.
We haven't been subject to a World War II style attack. I think we'd have a lot of appetite for responding very aggressively. It's just that we've lived in an era of where that kind of attack on the United States directly has not occurred. And I think you totally misstated the history of what happened with the Taliban. You said it took 20 years to get rid of the Taliban. The Taliban was essentially out in a matter of weeks.
You know those podcasters, YouTubers, and influencers who've never seen an oppressive, dictatorial, or even jihadist regime that they don't rush to defend? Because that's what's happening now with Iran, with a bunch of people. And lo and behold, one of them is comedian Dave Smith, who says, how could the US now strike Iran that might lead to regime change? Because regime change is always bad and always terrible and always drags the United States into endless wars. Is this true? Here is a debate between Dave Smith and Dinesh D'Souza with the history and a lot on the line in the present. Let's break it down.
The United States, right in the aftermath of World War II, enforced regime change on a whole bunch of societies, including notably Japan and Germany, and the results have been excellent. In the Cold War, which was a war, it might have been a war, as Margaret Thatcher said, quote, without firing a shot, but there was an awful lot of defense spending that went into it. There were awful lot of missiles that were built, the MX missile, the B-1 bomber, and so on. In the Cold War, you had innumerable examples of regime change. Ceausescu was out in Romania. There were tyrannical governments that were out in East Germany, in Poland, in Bulgaria, essentially the entire Soviet orbit, including the Soviet Union itself. Is anyone going to say regime change in the Soviet Union was not a good idea when the Communist Party abolished itself and got rid of it? In the 1990s, George H.W. Bush assembled a coalition to eject Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. That was forcible regime change. That's why Kuwait is basically a free country today. Is it perfect? No, it's a monarchy. It's a autocratic society, but it's stable. It has good relations with the United States. So that advanced our ideals and our interests. So again, there's example after example after example. Let's take the two that probably are the only ones that benefit you, and that is Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, there are two aspects here that should be distinguished, and they typically get conflated. The first one is the regime change itself, and the second one is the kind of managerial aftermath. So was the United States wrong to fling the Taliban outside of Afghanistan? Those are the guys who provided the monkey bars for the terrorists of 9/11. We were directly attacked on our own soil. It was completely right. It was both in our interests and it supported our ideals to go over there and pulverize them. Now, if you fast forward 5 years and I see this ridiculous sight of U.S. generals supervising some, tribal meeting and trying to tell them how to conduct the meeting and how their schools should be run and what their attitude should be toward girls, this is the nonsensical aftermath. This is the Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell nonsense that if you break it, you got to fix it. We somehow have to own these societies. That's pure bullshit. So I say
I'm going to stop you here.
Change and no to the aftermath.
What he's saying here is actually the Trump doctrine, if you noticed. Trump has taken action quite a few times. He did it against Iran. He did it in other places against the Houthis. He did it in Venezuela, right, where he captured Maduro. So this has actually been the Trump doctrine pretty much, is that you do hit the enemy. So it's not just an empty threat. They know you mean business, but you're not getting dragged into this long reconstruction afterwards. So all the actions that Trump has taken, they've been short and surgical. And that's kind of what's on the table now also regarding a hit on Iran. Everyone is talking about a bombing of regime targets that could maybe topple it. Nobody is talking about the aftermath of building and sending in administrators there. And that's the differentiation that Dinesh D'Souza is making there in his segment.
Tell from the look on your face you want to respond before I start with the questions, Dave. Go right ahead, please. 2 minutes, more or less.
Well, okay, so Dinesh points out the successful regime changes in Japan and Germany, but what he leaves out there is the tens of millions of civilians that had to be slaughtered in order to do that, and the decades and decades and decades of military occupation that followed. And so if you're telling me that anyone in the United States of America has the stomach for anything like that right now, we both know that's just completely off the table. Even if you can get past the little pesky morality of it, there's just no way that anyone has the stomach or the political will for anything like that today.
What, the morality of defeating the Nazis? The morality of like going to Berlin and getting an unconditional surrender from the Nazis? And then, yes, making sure they transition into democratic government. And the same thing with Japan, who committed Pearl Harbor against the Americans, getting complete defeat from them. The morality, not to mention the morality. What morality? Yeah, you have enemies in this case who have imperialistic expansionist ideas, including genocidal ideas in the case of Germany, and you got to the capital, defeated them, and had them raise the white flag. That was one of the great achievements of Western civilization in the 20th century that you dismiss. I can't believe it.
Of course, you can say that the Soviet Union or the Cold War was a war, even though it was just defense spending, but you got a yada yada over the millions of Cambodians and Vietnamese that were slaughtered in those wars. And then to talk about the Soviet Union dissolving, I mean, okay, you could say that is a regime change, but we're obviously talking about like US-led regime change wars here. And like I said, look, the first of all, we went and pretty much took out Al-Qaeda's terror cells in Afghanistan by Christmas of 2001. It was mostly done with CIA and special ops. And then we fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban. And so if you want to say that the problem isn't overthrowing the regime, the problem is sticking around and nation building, okay, but we didn't do that in Libya. We just completely destroyed the place. And we didn't do that in Syria. And it looks like that place is on its way to being destroyed too. And yet the fact is that if you're going to do a regime change, well, the only way to really have a say in what government follows is you have to militarily occupy the place. But if you want to go around, if you, again, like I gave you a whole bunch of examples and you're saying the only one I really have is Iraq and Afghanistan, but of course, Libya is an obvious other example. Well, yeah, we didn't make any of those mistakes that you suggested. We just destroyed the place, and there's open air slave markets there to this day.
They didn't destroy the place. They got rid of Gaddafi and then they destroyed themselves in tribal warfare. There's a bit of a difference.
I mean, you guys at this point, I'll wrap up. I'm sorry, Judge, but you guys with your regime change, philosophy, you have a Holocaust's worth of dead people on your conscience.
Dinesh, how does the United States gain by its extraordinary obeisance to and financing of the government in Israel?
Andy, if I may, give me 2 minutes to respond to Dave, and then let's launch the questions, just because he got the extra 2. I just want to address a couple of specific
Go right ahead.
First of all, I don't agree at all that somehow the United States has turned into a nation of namby-pambies and would not engage in World War II style operations. We haven't been subject to a World War II style attack. Yes, if the Chinese came over and, let's just say, bombed Chicago and took out the city, or wiped out 1/3 of our Navy, as happened in Pearl Harbor, I think we'd have a lot of appetite for responding very aggressively. It's just that we've lived in an era of where that kind of attack on the United States directly has not occurred, and therefore we've had these sort of smaller wars, at least by comparison. I think you totally misstated the history of what happened with the Taliban. You said it took 20 years to get rid of the Taliban. That's laughable nonsense. All of us were there. The Taliban was essentially out in a matter of weeks. They were gone. They were in the mountains. They were in hiding. I remember Dick Cheney saying we've run out of targets. So this was a case where the intervention itself was a massive success. Now, you said, and I think this is the fallacy here, that if you knock out the government, you have a responsibility to go and run the country. False, false, and false again. All you have to do, if you're running out a bunch of thugs, all you have to do is go and find the rival thugs who are more friendly to you and say to them, in this case, by the way, they happen to be called the Northern Alliance, we're giving the country to you. You run the country from now on. We're not telling you how to run the country. We're not telling you what policies to have or what your educational system should be. All we're telling you is you need to be a friend of the United States. That's how a mature foreign policy is run. It's been run that way, by the way, for centuries by powerful countries. When the British, for example, defeated an opponent, they didn't necessarily feel we've got to go over there. No, you basically get your friends in there and they deal with you on a different basis than the bad guys.
Dave, I'm going to let you respond.
Well, look, I mean, just to say that this is a mature foreign policy or something. By the way, I just never said, it was just blatantly not at all what I said. I didn't say if you depose the leader, therefore you break it, you buy it. I'm suggesting we don't go around deposing the leader. And to sit here and say that this is a mature foreign policy, like it's a, yes. So we're sitting here. So currently we have a white hot war going on in Europe right now, which is a proxy war between all of Europe, the United States of America, and the biggest nuclear power in the history of the world. And at that point, where Donald Trump has been unable to bring this war to a close, which he promised to do on day one, he's been unable to do that. So at that point, we're going to start flirting with multiple wars of choice, wars of aggression, wars where we have not been attacked, that we do not need to fight, that risk catastrophes. There's nothing mature or wise about that. This is reckless. This is a result of living in an era of decadent elites where the most unimpressive have risen to the top. And there is absolutely no tradition of serious conservatism or right-wing thinking that would tell you that this is the move to make at this point in history.
This guy is talking about who rose to the top. Look at him. He's like one of the most influential talkers on the internet. He's a complete retard. He's the person who said that Israel was the biggest terrorist organization in the Middle East, while all the intelligence agencies across Europe are running around trying to stop jihadist terror in Europe, Muslim Brotherhood terror like that of Hamas. All right, he's the person who said that Iran doesn't have any regional ambitions, that Iran's nuclear program is just there as a deterrent, a breakout deterrent. So he completely miscategorizes these forces in the world. To be said, though, that doesn't mean you have to take action against them necessarily. And I'm not sure that what Dinesh is saying is true regarding Israel, not Israel, or the United States should be taking that kind of action, let's say, against Iran. But there's one thing to say, well, I don't want to take action. And there's another thing of just being completely naive about what these countries are and what their goals are. It's two separate things.
Start attacking and flirting with wars of nations that pose no threat to you based off lies. All of them based off lies. There's no maturity in that whatsoever.
Let me briefly answer, if I may, and then we can do questions. I'm just trying to keep the even timing here. Look, so I strongly oppose this Ukraine war. And in no way do I want to take the position that I'm defending every war, defending every intervention. In fact, I think a key aspect of this debate is to ask, when is it appropriate for the U.S. to intervene at all? So my view is that we should intervene only when both our values and our interests are involved, when it is to our benefit, both in terms of values and in terms of interest. So let's take Ukraine. We may have certain common values with Ukraine, a little hard to say, but let's say we did. We really have no interest over there. It's a very distant country. It is on the Russian border. It comes out of the debris of the Cold War. So our interests there are minimal at best. Now, contrast this, for example, with Iran and Venezuela. Venezuela has been a staging operation ground for hostile powers for 20 years. There are Iranian radicals sitting in the Venezuelan parliament. There are Chinese operatives in Venezuela. There are Cuban bodyguards guarding Maduro. So the idea that somehow there's this sort of innocent nation operating on its own and we just go over there. Iran is the node center of problems for the United States since the Iranian Revolution. Radical Islam has for the first time got a hold of a major state. It's difficult enough to deal with ragtag operations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but when you have a powerful country, 90 million people, very smart, possibly nuclear capacity or certainly nuclear potential, you're dealing with a serious threat. There's no other way to look at it.
Dinesh, what does the United States gain from the billions of dollars it gives to and the utter obsequious behavior it shows toward the government of the State of Israel?
The United States is not obsequious toward Israel. Israel is mostly obsequious to the United States. It makes no sense to talk about the rabbit controlling the elephant when quite clearly the elephant controls the rabbit. Case in point, the Israelis would have been really happy after the U.S. Took out the Iran nuclear facilities to go in there, wipe out the mullahs, and their hand was stayed. By whom? By us, by Trump. Trump's like, I've had enough. I'm done. Now, Trump may change his mind in the aftermath of all the Iran protests of now, but the truth of it is that's a clear indication of the United States calling the shots and not Israel. Now, why are we friends with Israel at all? Well, first of all, can we wake up to the fact that there is a global red-green alliance? The red representing the socialists and the leftists, as the global left is allied with radical Islam, and they're basically, who's their target? What does LGBTQ have in common with radical Muslims? Here's the answer. They are opposed to the Jews, they are opposed to the Christians, they're opposed to Israel, they're opposed to the United States, and they are united by that common hatred. So doesn't common sense tell you that it's better for the Jews and the Christians to come closer together, for America and Israel to come closer together to repel this global threat? The answer is yes. And so to act as if the United States is somehow kind of acting on the orders of Israel, when A, we have a common interest with Israel, B, the Israelis are the best people in the world to fight radical Islam. They know how to do it. The second best, by the way, are countries like UAE. I just saw one of the leaders of UAE say anti-Semitism is an opinion in Europe and America. Anti-Semitism in UAE is illegal. There's no Muslim Brotherhood in the UAE. So the best fighters against radical Islam, number one, Israel. Number two, countries like UAE. The worst fighters against radical Islam, Australia, Canada, Europe, the United States. Don't we see that this Islamic infiltration is occurring right in the middle of our own country? I saw after Mamdani won, one of his activists said that the radical Muslims will have 50 congressmen in 10 years. So are we pretending like this is all happening, quote, over there instead of right here?
And who is the biggest boon and aid to those radical jihadists in the United States? It's people like Dave Smith, who always make excuses for such regimes like the Iranian regime by claiming that they're actually benign. You know? And it's also funny, this whole thing about the aid to Israel and support for Israel. People don't understand. You know that in the first 20 years of Israel's existence, the United States did not support Israel. After 48, the United States did not sell any weapons to Israel. All the weapons were bought off secondhand from Czechoslovakia in the War of Independence, 48, and then from the French. The entire Six-Day War, Israel's greatest military victory, one of the greatest military victories of the 20th century, all with French weapons. The Suez Crisis in 56, which was a victory for Israel, the French, and the British against the Egyptians, who nationalized the Suez Canal, which was against international law, of course, who afterwards kicked Israel out of the Sinai and basically handed a political victory to the Egyptians, the United States, under Dwight Eisenhower. Why? Because they were trying to be on the side of the Arabs, keep them away from the Soviets, which didn't work. So it was after the victory of 67 and after the failure of trying to get on the good side of the Arab regimes, then America decided, the U.S. decided that they're going to go and back Israel because Israel was the winning horse in the region and the only one that was giving them something back. That was the process. It didn't start off like that. America made the decision that this is what we want. So there you go. Interesting discussion. Again, just to say, I'm not of the position necessarily that America needs to be fighting, like Dave Smith called it, high-risk wars against, I don't know, far-off targets or what he claims are, non-threatening targets. I think Iran is a very threatening country, not just to America, but literally all of America's partners in the Middle East. Not to mention all the countries in Europe who are very concerned over their nuclear program. And if a strike against regime targets can lead to the regime being toppled, there's definitely a lot to consider there. But to even begin the consideration, you have to start from the point of understanding what type of regime they are and what their ideology is. And it's the likes of Dave Smith, the Red in the Red-Green Alliance, who just don't understand that. They always think that these regimes are benign and benevolent, and the only reason they would ever threaten America is because they were attacked in regime change or something like that. That's not the case. Start from the facts of what they are and who they are, and then you can decide if you want to act or not. I feel like this administration in the US are acting like that. They know exactly who Iran are, and they're basing their considerations on the reality. And then they'll come to their choice, and we'll see.